Well, hey everybody, Wes McDonald, and I want to thank you for tuning in to another episode of Tiger Tube. Now, if you can't see any of us on the screen today, that means you're actually listening to us on Tiger Paw Radio, and want to thank you for doing that as well. So pretty exciting lineup today. This is very dealer focused. This is one that I always love to do, to be able to support the dealer community and to be able to help other dealers through the experiences of their own people. And the past few years have certainly tested the mettle of business leaders in the office equipment channel. It's not gotten any easier with the chip shortages and supply chain issues. There are those that would have you believe that the space will continue to suffer, that NPS and the value of A3 are dead, but are they? And what other ways must organizations flex and adapt to prosper in the age of, what we call the new office, right? So want to thank everyone for coming in today. Bob Evans with Function 4, Brian Stevenson at Footprint Managed Services, and Jeff Bendix at Bendix Imaging. So thank you, gentlemen, one and all, for coming in today.
Thanks, Wes.
Hey, thanks, Wes.
Now, one of the things that I love to do, I know that sometimes people will introduce you and read off all your accolades, but nobody knows you better than yourself. So as is my habit, I'm going to get you to introduce yourselves.
So yeah, quickly, I've been in the print industry, print space for about 25 years. So pretty well my entire working career. Started way back as a sales rep with Lanier and eventually became the leader of, I think, two pretty successful MPS practices. The first one was Laser Networks and now Footprint. So today I spend most of my time on two initiatives. One is as the president of Footprint Managed Services, and the other part of my world is as the director of Intech, which sits under the buying group, Independent Suppliers Group, includes many of the most progressive MPS resellers in the US. That's maybe my day-to-day role. I've been fortunate to participate as a founder and a longtime board member of the MPSA, just recently retired. Yeah, thanks, Wes. And spending some time now as a member of HP's advisory council and part of a technology committee with NOPA, which is the National Office Products Alliance. My first job out of university was playing fast pitch softball in New Zealand. Maybe if I'd been a little better, I would have lasted longer than one season down there, but that was my first job out of school.
My name's Bob Evans. I'm based out of Houston, Texas. I've been in the office equipment industry for 37 years. Started with Lanier in Beaumont, Texas, straight out of college. Worked a few years at Danka, opened my own dealership with two partners in '98. In the last couple of years, we're getting into the managed IT and services businesses. So that's continuing to grow. For the last 5 years, I've been on the BTA on the BTA board, national board, and I'm currently the past president. So we'll be cycling off soon. People don't know I grew up on a farm in a really small town. So I guess you could say it was my job, but it was just my job from the get-go. And once upon a time, I could drive anything with a motor, four wheels, and tracks, any kind of heavy equipment. So.
Thanks, Wes. Jeff Bendix, founder and president of Bendix Imaging. However, we generally go by Bendix Technology Center now, just because we do a lot more than just printing and imaging. But just wrapped up our 20th year in business, so not quite as long as Brian and Bob, but a couple decades behind us. And Lord willing, we'll have a couple of more. I was actually invited to go to Dubai this year to help put on one of the world's largest fireworks shows.
Wow, that's so cool.
Not quite sure if I'm gonna be able to make it yet, but yeah, I got that invitation last week. So that might be a good New Year's.
Well, look at us. We've got New Zealand and Dubai in the interview now. So fantastic. One of the things, obviously, that, we do live in challenging times right now, to say the least. And the pandemic has changed a lot of things in the office equipment channel. Talked about a few of those things at the beginning, but maybe you could share with me what you think some of the biggest changes to the channel were that were brought on by, the pandemic.
Yeah, sure. So I'm not sure how long to spend on this, but I'll highlight three things that I think, anyway, from my perspective. One would be how a business sells. The second one would be what a business sells. And I would say the third one's a shift in the competitive landscape. So if I was to drill into any of those, I think, how a business sells, like there's a significant percentage of dealers that, sold through the historic model of, way back, cold calls equals demos equals sales, or the classic wine them, dine them, sign them. like, I feel like the coronavirus has changed all of that. Obviously you just can't see people the same way. And then, what a business sells if, if you're a traditional geographic based independent and everything's shut down or slowed down, one of the biggest, maybe one of the best options to continue, beyond the PPP or government support was, sell your existing customers more categories. So whether that was PPE, office products, maybe stand up an e-com site, extend your print offering for wide format or impact or some other type of printing, or maybe, as Bob mentioned earlier, talking about managed services, and maybe some of these independents are learning and figuring out how to add managed IT into their portfolio. And then the third one, which I do think is probably going to be lasting, is this competitive landscape shift. The geographic guys that I've spoken with anyway, that were focused on the face-to-face selling, they were knocked off stride. Like they weren't prepared for a pandemic, nobody was. Their way of selling fully disrupted. But then on the other hand, you've got these resellers that already sold virtually or through an e-com platform. So CDW, Insight, SoftChoice, SHI, companies like that. And those are larger examples, but they've been able to pick up significant share in the print space during the past year and a half. And, I'm sure people listening could probably highlight other regional VARs that have done the same. So maybe that's my take on West.
I agree with Brian on the way we sell. I mean, obviously everything went remote, depending on where you were located. It was the impact of how remote you went. Here in Texas, we weren't, we were remote for a short period of time. People came back sooner. So, we were selling different products to companies, smaller, desktop stuff that they had to be able to take to their house. We had to figure out how to get that to them. But then from a sales side too, also they were buying stuff online. They were buying stuff through other through the different online stores. And so I agree now, to go out and knock on doors and make cold calls is not going to be a long-term play. You're going to have to learn how to market yourself online. You're going to have to come up with some kind of e-commerce inside sales team. That was beginning to happen already to a certain extent, and the pandemic actually, sped that up. So on the print side, I definitely think we're going to have to understand that we're going to sell more smaller devices, more than likely too, into locations where we did not sell them before in a different way. On the IT and the software side, I think the digital transformation sped up. People are much more focused about the cloud now. The ones that did have to go home wanted to be able to access their, to their documents. They wanted to be able to collaborate, phone systems. It's all wrapped into, much more interest in how can I be in the cloud.
Well, that's great. Appreciate that. And Jeff Bendix, what about yourself? I know that you and I have had talks about some of the things that you've done to change your business over the years, but during the pandemic, what do you find was, kind of the biggest challenge or change?
I was just kind of thinking about that and more from the customer standpoint rather than the dealer standpoint. And I think no matter where you were located, like here in South Dakota, we didn't shut down at all. We were the only state that didn't shut anything down. But everybody was thinking about it. What if? So from the most extreme to end of restrictions to here where we're at, where we have no restrictions, I think pretty much every business owner or manager was thinking about how can I keep my business running with no employees here? And how can I keep my customers spending without letting my customers interact with us in traditional ways? So whatever that means, keeping my employees working, keeping their families fed, and keeping them doing their jobs while still serving our client base. And, and the most successful is how can we even thrive during this time? How can we leverage things and do things in a different way? So every industry, every business is a little different on what technologies they adopted, but nonetheless, it significantly advanced the maturation of those different products and really made everybody much more comfortable with the things that a lot of us were trying to sell for years and convince them on, hey, you need this. And now they realize that they need this.
Okay, on to the next question. So when you're on LinkedIn or anywhere else, obviously in the social world, things get expanded probably quite a bit more than they should. And there are those that say managed print is dead. So let's go through this one for a second. Is it true? Is it false? And some thoughts behind why. And Brian Stevenson, maybe I'll get you to start this one.
Yeah, like for customers, the task of tracking your print assets and toner cartridges, it was already problematic before the pandemic hit. You throw in this new reality of remote work, and Bob and Jeff are very fortunate in the states that they were in. I was in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, 360 days of lockdowns in Toronto.
Yep.
So it's been brutal. So it's obviously a major city. There's probably a lot of similar major cities across the globe that have been challenged with this. But so you throw in this reality of remote work, of illness, of mass turnover now, right? We're into this great resignation. And I'd say even the ad hoc way of supporting print infrastructure, like it's totally come apart in many cases. If you had any sort of multi-city, multi-state, multi-country environments, it became really difficult, or has become really difficult to manage your assets. So, and more so now because of the pandemic. So from what I've seen and the people that I've spoken with, I actually think it's, again, the opposite of that. So we've seen mass pickup of MPS in the SOHO space.
Oh, wow.
We've seen it in the SMB space. It was already well saturated, as we know, in the upper mid-market and the enterprise. And so maybe the why it's not slowing down anytime soon, I think, is the broader acceptance of managed services. So talking about Jeff and Bob that are now, they've incubated managed IT, they're now growing, they're a key component to their businesses. These are clearly being accepted and received by their customers. And that significant outsourcing of IT has extended now beyond print into IT services. But then when you look beyond that and just into the broader office, we're seeing managed services touching coffee, touching water, like hell, they're even touching toilet paper now. Like everything that's janitorial that you can track is being tracked. And from my perspective, it most definitely looks like managed services is becoming more locked into the fabric of businesses. That I think it's going to lift several categories, including the well-entrenched ones like print. So to answer your question, I think it's false. Managed print's not dead, and I think it's got a pretty good few years ahead of it.
And Jeff Bendix, what about yourself? Is managed print dead? Is it growing or is it changing? What's your take?
But managed print is absolutely not dead. In fact, just my operation, we're on track to the next couple months are good. We should hit 40% growth in our managed print this year.
Wow.
So it is absolutely not dead. We're bringing on new clients regularly.
So 40% growth seems a lot stronger than dead.
Yeah. Not anything to sneeze at there. So people are very receptive. Like Brian said, people are much more used to just outsourcing it and just saying, okay, it's yours, you take care of it. I just want one bill to write and be done. And I want it out of my head and just have somebody that I trust that's going to take care of it. And if you provide that, no matter what the service is, as I mentioned, we pretty much try to roll into a customer environment anymore, and we take over everything. We start with the perimeter, the cybersecurity, network security, data, managed IT services, maintenance, servers, everything, and bring it all on. And we just include print as part of that.
Right.
It's not even a discussion point. I almost never even quote.
And how about you, Bob? Is managed print dead? On life support, growing? What's your perspective in your area?
I definitely don't think it's dead. I think it's actually growing. I think it's the way you sell it's going to change. Same thing everybody was talking about, the whole mantra about print volumes and print placements are going down. Maybe so. Our print volume went down, 35% before we bottomed out in 2020 in August over 2019. We're back. This August was the first time we're back to 2019 numbers in the print volume side of it.
Oh, that's great.
I think that's coming back. And kind of like Jeff, though, our total, if you will say just an MFP service, was down 12% last year. Our MPS service was up 32%.
Wow.
And so I do believe that, people are, more volumes being pushed to printers. They want, those companies want somebody to come in and help them control those costs, and are willing to pay for that. I think eventually, we're already seeing it happen. It's going to become a subscription model. You're going to be a flat rate. The CPP is dead. It's dying. And I mean, you've already seen manufacturers that are coming out. Kyocera just introduced a program for their dealers. Konica Minolta is already selling a flat rate program. And so we were doing that too. We started testing it in the print side, and we're actually in the process of, beginning to look to roll that out on our MFP side too. I think in the future, companies are going to want to pay one flat rate for phones, print, IT, and we're going to have to figure out how to deliver it.
Here's a little known fact. The first time that I kind of got the idea of moving into a flat rate direction was with Brian Stevenson, not too far from his house, having a pint. You remember that, Brian?
I totally do, Wes. Yeah, maybe a couple pints. Yeah, that was really good.
And how many years ago was that, right? So, yeah.
I'm 10.
Yeah, I'm a big believer, Bob, in what you say there is that, although managed print isn't dead, that it is changing, and that it's really interesting to see sort of this proliferation of flat rate and other models in which people are trying to, change how customers kind of acquire these services, right? Hey, Bob, you mentioned earlier that obviously you're seeing a difference in the mix, that you did see a slight decrease in your A3 and, a 30+% increase in, the A4 business, right? So maybe it's a good time to shift gears. And I'll ask this question in two parts. One, A3, A4 mix, obviously, I think it is changing, and maybe just talk about how. But the second one, maybe you guys could touch on, is the difference between ink sales and toner sales. And I just did an interview last week with a couple of large distributors, and they were talking about the growth of ink in their, in their distribution channels, right? So is that a reality? Is it happening? So, maybe we'll start there. And Bob, maybe you could start us off on that, the A3, A4 mix, as you started to talk about, delve into that a little more. How's that changing? What's happening?
We're seeing that happen before the pandemic. I think the pandemic again sped that up, with companies looking at it and going, I don't need as big equipment. I don't have as many people in here, and devices going to, remote locations. And so we've been tracking it for a couple of years. Last year, our A4 sales were up 263% over the year before.
263%.
263% over the year before. And so, we're seeing a lot more, a lot more of that going now. That's, it's now 16% of our total MFP hardware. And so, we see that number continuing to increase, and I think it's gonna happen. In 2020, it was 7.4% of our total hardware, total MFP hardware. And so we really see that beginning to happen. We're not doing a lot of ink. We're an authorized HP, but we didn't push the page wide as much, which is good because they're going away. But it's definitely A4. We do primarily HP, do some Kyocera on the A4 side too. And those, we're pushing a lot more of those devices, color and black and white.
Okay, that's great. So huge increase in A4, and it looks like still predominantly toner. And Brian Stevenson, how about yourself? What are you seeing out there?
Yeah, we're set up a little differently than Bob, where we've been more of a decentralized model. So we are heavy HP for sure. And I would say there was, in the markets that we participate in and with the resellers we work with, that there was a shift for sure in the early days of the pandemic. Not quite back to that swivel chair printing, but smaller work group MFPs. We're replacing some centralized devices. I think, right? It's obvious. I think helps reduce, foot traffic and fewer hands touching devices, which I'll kind of relate around the coronavirus. And Bob's point's really interesting, in that we've seen and worked with a lot of call it agent dealers, or ones that have been primarily they carry primarily a copier-based device, A3 heavy device. And during the pandemic, they've done a really nice job, in many cases, picking up an A4 line to complement that, and really as an extension for their business. Maybe a lot of them historically walked by those smaller printers, and when the pandemic hit, there was an opportunity there to sell more to their base, and obviously, I think Bob's 100% right. A3 to A4, the trend's been happening a while. Probably got sped up during the pandemic, and the laser ink mix is interesting, West. You're seeing ink come up probably because of the page wides. They've now been announced that they're going to be discontinued. 5 years from now, they'll be probably out of market. And so what does that mean for, the others that are playing in the space? Epson's got a great product out there that's high volume, ink based. Other players are coming in with ink. Will they stay down that platform, or will they move back to laser, given the move from HP? I don't know. Yeah.
I guess we'll see, eh? But yeah, it really is interesting. I was surprised, I think, as anybody, once HP made that announcement on the page wide, right?
Right.
You just never know what's going to happen in this channel, right?
You never do. So.
Hey, Jeff Bendix, what about yourself on the A3 to A4 front? What are you seeing, and what are you predicting?
Yeah, we've been seeing the A3 to A4 conversion for many years, and in fact, we predominantly sell A4 devices over A3. So that's nothing new to our customer base. Very, very common for us to go in against an A3 device, and while we can sell them, to just show them what they actually need, run the reports off the devices or pull it off of our print fleet monitoring or what have you, and just show them, here's what you're actually using. Now let's talk actual numbers based on your needs. And that shift has been going on for a long time. But yeah, like Bob said, with all the remote work and people being more spread out or working from home or remote locations, getting all the small A4 devices bought up out of the market, like now there's like nothing to sell, right? Everybody's waiting for manufacturing to catch back up, which is frustrating. But yeah, everybody's been using these things for a year and a half now and saying, hey, I'm getting by just fine. Why do I need that $10,000 or $15,000 machine when I can have a whole fleet of these other ones for half of that?
So interesting to see that mix of growth on the A4 side. That kind of gives us a good segue into remote work, right? And obviously a lot of the A4 opportunity being driven because of the decentralization of the office, right? So is this a temporary thing to get us through the pandemic, or is this going to be a permanent change to how and where people work? And Bob, maybe I'll get you to take this one first.
I think it's going to be a hybrid. You're going to have, there was already some of that happening too, right? Especially with the younger generation. I have a daughter who, she hasn't worked in an office in 5 years,
right?
Or 6 years, right? She's a software developer. And so, certain jobs are going to continue to be that. Some are going to, I think, come back. I think it's also going to depend possibly on what part of the United States you're in, or what other country, right?
Oh, sure.
Again, a lot more jobs came back in Texas earlier. Some of the where cost of living's high, may not. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
Yeah, it's interesting when you say that there is definitely a geographic component to the answer to the question, right? So.
Yeah, well, I think here in Canada West, I'd imagine just how big remote work is here, that it's going to be here, for at least the balance of my working lifetime. So at a minimum, probably. And as Bob's mentioned, like his daughter working in it, and this next generation of talent, which everyone's clamoring for now, they're seeking different things. So I would imagine the remote workforce, at least in Canada, will be pretty significant, and that's probably a legit opportunity for resellers that can sell into that space, figure out how to do it efficiently, how they can add value to it. And I look at the program that you speak about a lot, West, in terms of flat rate. I think for an independent to be successful trying to target this space, you can't customize every solution like an MPS. This has to be standardized. We saw what HP's done with Instant Ink and their ability to hit 10 million subscriptions. it's got to be that easy. And then maybe there's some layer of value that a dealer can add on top of that. And if you can do that, then I think it's scalable. I think there's a real opportunity. And if you can't do that, then, from my perspective anyway, I'd say be really cautious about spending a lot of time in that area.
Yeah, I love what you say about this, this idea that certainly in Canada, that remote opportunity is going to be huge. And I think in a lot of areas that are as dispersed as we are for populations, right, that it's always been kind of a thing anyway. But this idea that a flat rate adding value on top of that base offering is how we, start to look at making more money in the future, right? So I'll be interested to follow that as well, to see how we add value in a subscription economy, especially one that is predominantly online, right?
Right.
And Jeff Bendix, what about yourself in your area? You mentioned obviously that you guys didn't even have lockdown. So is remote work affecting you? Is it impacting you? Is it here to stay?
Well, I agree with everything the other two gentlemen said. I think certain roles, certain types of jobs are very conducive to a remote work, while others aren't conducive to it at all. So it'll definitely be blended, but in like forums and peer groups and things I'm part of, and I watch, our chat forums and stuff every day, more and more managed service providers are being asked by their customers regularly on this remote work. Okay, we've kind of already taken care of the security kind of things, making sure that you're securing the computers they're working on and what they're logging into and password hygiene and things of that nature. But how do I know if there is print? How do I know they're using that for business purposes and it's not all printing out kids' homework? How do I know? How can I monitor what my employees are doing? So now they have company-owned devices in many cases, and they're on the clock, if you will. But how do I know they're working? So looking for oversight technologies to monitor what those people are doing during the day. Even application whitelisting, controlling what they can do on those PCs. So there's lots of other opportunities for those remote workers to provide to those businesses to keep their businesses and their employees and their customers safe and secure, and to make sure the business isn't bleeding a lot of cash out of all those different endpoints that are sitting in everybody's houses.
Yeah, it's such a big consideration. And Bob mentioned earlier sort of this growth in the cloud, right, for cloud services. And print's certainly not free of that, right? That, cloud print solutions are really have had a huge uptick. I work with a lot of partners as well that do some of these oversight technologies that you talk about, right? If it's a user management or application level control, kind of et cetera. And yeah, it's certainly the importance of software, beyond just sort of print drivers anymore is definitely seems to be taking center stage, right? Yeah. Hey, and it kind of segues into the next question, which is, Bob and Jeff, you guys have both added managed IT, to your businesses and grown through it. And Brian, you've done other things with your business as well. How important is diversification for the future of the office equipment channel? Or can people make a run at it just doing pure play managed print services? And Brian, maybe I'll get you to start that question.
Well, yeah, I think it depends. Sorry for the really vague answer.
That's a good answer. It's a true.
Yeah. Like quite frankly, probably every dealer at this point knows whether they have to change or they don't. And the ones that do know they have to change and are progressive, they're likely on their way to updating that business model if it requires some adjustment. What would I say? If you've got a great e-com platform and you've been selling virtually for a while, you're probably cruising, you're probably just gaining share, and your focus is doubling down on gaining share. You're probably not spending time looking at, extending your portfolio. But if you're, maybe geographically focused, or you manage major accounts in major cities and you saw 40% page reductions, and you're not like Texas and you've recovered 20% of that loss, of those lost pages, you've got to adapt. And maybe the first, your first step at that was bringing in Troy, or bringing in, Zebra, or bringing in, mailing solutions or wide format, just these next concentric circles to try to recapture the volume. And then if it doesn't get you all the way back, then I do think you've got to look beyond print. And because those are real investments. Jeff and Bob, right? They both spent a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of resource investing in managed IT. Like, you can't just stand those up in 48 hours and say, I'm in this business.
Right.
And you're in an environment where there are so many unknowns and hiring's challenging, and it's not like your buckets are full of revenue that this is an easy incubator project for you. So yeah, there you go. It depends, Wes.
Yeah,
Sorry.
well, no, the nugget I really took away from that, though, is that there are different choices, right? So that, those that, like you said, do have an e-commerce platform or have been sort of going down that road already, sounds to me like more of a high volume, lower margin, kind of approach to the business, right? But
Yeah.
less. And then folks like Jeff and Bob, who've really taken the approach of diversifying those services, just completely, different answers to the same question, right? How do I grow? Appreciate that. And Jeff Bendix, maybe I'll get you to add to that. So, what do you think? Obviously, you've diversified your services. I'm not sure what else to add to that. I love Brian's answer. It kind of covers a lot.
Yeah, eloquently spoken, Brian. The diversification for us has been key. I agree with Brian's statement, though, that there likely are a number of dealers out there and in certain markets or geographical regions where they can still just focus on print and be very successful at that. Also, I'm sure both Bob and Brian have known over their years, they've got more years in it than me, but business is constantly, an ebb and flow, and you hit a plateau and you go down for a while and come back up. There's a lot of times where you make a whole lot more money with a lot fewer employees. And so some may realize that, and you just have a natural reduction in staff, just from attrition. And they're like, hey, things are going pretty good. I'm making twice as much money. I have fewer headaches, fewer employees. I'm a little more laser focused in this print market. I don't want to deal with anything else, and I'm doing good. Especially some of those people that may only have 5 or 10 years left before they want to retire. They're probably not going to take the significant investment of time and money to look at diversifying into cybersecurity solutions or other IT services. It's a big animal to try to wrangle, and Bob can attest to that.
Yeah, and again, it seems like your answer was also it depends, right? And that's another angle to think of, is that we are in an aging channel, and there are a lot of businesses that are looking for really kind of that retirement plan in 5 or 6 years. So yeah, different answers for different folks. But congrats on what you're doing in the managed IT space. And Bob, how about yourself? What color do you have to add to that answer as well?
Well, to add on to what Jeff said, I would agree on it depends. It depends on where, if you're a copier dealer, it depends on where you're at in your journey, because it is a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of effort to get into the IT and the services business. And so, if I was 4 or 5 years out, I don't believe I would do that. I would look at other options, whether it was sell or whatever. But if you're going to stay in this business, you're going to have to do something different, because the customer demands it. They're putting more and more pressure on a company to be able to provide other services for them. They want, one throat to choke, so they say. And it's also where the margins are at and where the growth is at. We've only been in IT for, really started getting in it in 2018. But, we were up 30%, 19 over 18. We were up 35%, 20 over, 20 over 19. We're up 53%, 21 over 20. That number's still, a smaller piece of the pie for our business, but our copier business is not growing that fast, I can promise you.
Yeah.
And if we're holding our own if we can. And the other thing with staying in the copy business by itself, I believe, is where all the price pressure ends up. But once you start talking to people about solutions, handling all types of business problems, they focus a whole lot less on the cost, and are much more interested in the value that you bring. And so it's going to be impossible to be, in my opinion, to be a long-term copier print only guy.
Yeah, I like what you say. So the need for change really to, to drive more of those high margin value based sales, right? And at the end of the day, that's, I think, what most dealerships are looking for, is to be able to find again those sweet spots, right? So, gentlemen, I cannot thank you enough for doing this interview with me today. I've certainly learned a lot, and it's really nice to hear from people that are actually in the field doing this, not just talking heads, but people whose livelihoods actually depend on this. So really appreciate you sharing your experiences and your wisdom. One of the things I do like to do before we close out the show is if you could just give one piece of advice to other dealers out there looking to grow post-pandemic, what would that be? And Bob, is Avi here already? Maybe you can start that.
I think you're going to have to definitely look at some of the services. You're going to have to transition into that. That's where the the customer is interested in that, and you can bring value to it, and it's a lot less of a commodity.
Great. And Brian Stevenson, how about yourself? One piece of advice.
It's yeah, right. Well, it's so wild, and I don't want to blabber here too long, but we've never been so isolated in our working life. Like, we've never been this isolated, and yet we're being told we have to sell differently. Our traditional customers buy less from us than they did 2 years ago. Our recurring revenues are down. We're dealing with these resignations. The future of work's difficult to pinpoint. Like, all of this stuff is happening, and at least in Canada, we've been relatively locked down. And so my advice would be understand the importance of agility right now, and I think the other component to this would be stay dialed into our print community. So whatever that means to you as a dealer or as a supplier partner to the community, that could be the BTA, it could be the MPSA, it could be Intech, it could be your local group of 5 or 6 or 10 dealers. Just try to come out of your hole because everybody's been challenged with it.
Well, I think it's a great answer, and I think it's a very sensitive answer, right? And that's certainly one thing that's kept me afloat, sort of in spirit and also in my business world, has been to work through those associations, right? That, that we are stronger together, and rising tides raise all ships. So, yeah, appreciate that answer. And Jeff Bendix, what about yourself? What's your one piece of advice?
But I saw a statistic not long ago that over 60% of the workforce is either actively looking for or contemplating a career change. So that everybody's hiring. You can't drive by any business and they have a for sale sign, or excuse me, not for sale sign, a help wanted sign. But it can also be an opportunity because lots of people are looking to move, make a lateral movement, make a vertical movement. So for those of you looking to add additional services, people are interested in maybe new opportunities and maybe interested in going down that journey with you. But you need somebody with some very good skill sets in those. You can't jump into any layer of IT services without investing in the right people to help manage that for you, or it can run you out of business.
So everyone, thank you very much for your time again, Bob, Brian, Jeff. And to our viewers and our listeners, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Tiger Tube if you're watching, and for listening to another episode of Tiger Paw Radio. And until next time, I'm Wes McDonald, your host. Make sure you check out www.tigerpaw.com for more tailored learning for our channel. Thank you.